our webinar Wednesday, Creating a Healthy Organizational Culture, the Key to Effective Change Management. And we take the time to thank you today for being with us. Next slide. Your presenters for today are Jennifer Gregory, our Director of Mobility Learning and Design and Practice, and myself, Tamerdis Hollywood, Senior Associate of Learning and Dissemination. Next slide. As you know, at the partnership, we always start our gatherings with the promise of community action. Feel free to speak it with me. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Next slide. Okay, what is organizational culture? Culture is the way that we do things around here, according to Terry Dill and Alan Kennedy. Next slide. Culture involves the articulation and consistent long term promotion of values, norms, and daily behaviors that allow people, organizations, and communities to align their actions in a disciplined way that contributes to progress. Culture is the great accelerant or deterrent of progress. And this is by the Standard Social Innovation Review from the winter of 2018. Next slide. So, how does culture show up in our organization? So, we think about what is seen and what is unseen. And in those aspects, we think of language, celebrations, our traditions that we have, the habits that we have, stories, power structure, etc. So let's jump into it. Next slide. Okay. So we see the produce and outcomes on the top and the soil equaling the culture on the bottom. So the apple tree that we see here produces fruit. That is the outcome. The soil underneath impacts the harvest. Our culture is in the soil and it influences what is produced. Culture is created not only by our history, again, our traditions and stories and power structures, we also absorb culture consciously and unconsciously. We are shaped by our culture, and our culture at times has been handed down to us from generations and generations. Each of us comes with all yummy stuff in unique ways, and we also are products of different soil. Next slide. Uh-oh, we're having a few technical difficulties, but no worries. Just stay here, Katie. So when we think about culture, we also create and shape the culture that we have. And we create culture together in all moments. We are all part of the culture. We own it and we perpetrate it. This is just a common network in the force. Thank you, Katie. So we see here culture operates at multiple levels. There's what we can see above the water, and there's also what we don't see, which is below the water. Cultural identity is again shaped by values, beliefs, and norms that can be individually, professionally, organizationally, institutionally, and also globally. So the term culture refers to attitudes and patterns of behavior in any given group. When we think about the values and defining those, we think of culture's standard for discerning what is good and not just in society, but what is good within our organization. Values are deeply embedded and critical for transmitting and teaching a culture's beliefs. Standards or ideas, which we also evaluate when it comes to people's actions, things, and situations, and personal values. These personal values are endorsed by individuals. So, for example, some people can regard family as their most important value, and they structure their lives this way, and they spend more time with their family. Other people might value success instead and give less time to their families in order to achieve their goals. Again, these are personal values. When it comes to moral values, this can help determine what is morally right or wrong to someone. So when we think of freedom and fairness and equality or well being, moral values are what are used to evaluate social institutions and are sometimes also known as political values. We also have aesthetic values, and these are values that are associated with the evaluation of artwork or beauty. So, norms. Norms are defined as attitudes and behaviors that are considered normal. This is typical or average within a group. Norms are agreed upon expectations and rules by a culture that guides the behavior of its members in any given situation. But of course, norms vary widely across cultural groups. Some maintain fair, direct eye contact. They can say, that's what Americans do. Uh, but other cultures may avert their eye as a sign of politeness or respect. So again, the norms vary. Sociologists speak of at least four type of norms: folkways, mores, taboos, and laws. And each of these, again, can identify to what your culture can be and is. Next slide. What does a healthy organizational culture look like? And I will pass the talking stick to Jennifer Gregory.
Thank you, Tamerdis, and thank you for giving us that overview of organizational culture. What I think is important to highlight from what you've shared is um, when you shared the quote at the very beginning that culture is the way we do things around here. You'll notice that it's not culture is the way we say we do things around here. Oftentimes, there is a disconnect between what we intend as leaders within an organization for the organizational culture to be and what the culture actually is. And that is a hallmark of an unhealthy organizational culture. In a healthy organizational culture, next slide, please. Your expectations around the way we say we do things and the way we actually do things are aligned, and they're centered in our values, and they are driven by our mission. Um, we also have to remember that organizational culture isn't a set it and forget it type of thing. It's not a box that we can check within an organization. A culture is always evolving because the people who build that culture are evolving. And as Tamir explained, every person within your organization is bringing their own cultural perspective from their lived experience, their demographic, their identities into the space and mixing in with the intended culture of the organization. And so, as that mixture changes over time, culture and maintaining a healthy culture must be revisited. So one common misconception, this is borrowed from Daniel Cole from the Culture Code. One misconception about highly successful cultures is that they are happy, lighthearted places. I immediately think of places like Google, where there's a slide next to the elevator. So take the fun way down to the lobby. But this is mostly not the case. Highly successful cultures are energized and engaged. Yes. But at their core, their members are oriented less around achieving happiness than around solving hard problems together. A healthy organizational culture does not run away from challenges or hard problems because they know that their organizational culture is strong enough to withstand the hard problems together. And later in this webinar, Tamerdis will speak to us about how do we maintain a healthy culture in the midst of organizational change. Next slide, please. So there are 6 dimensions of organizations, of every organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, community action, or otherwise. And one of those is culture and climate. But all 6 are so interconnected that as Tamira showed us the graphic of the roots beneath the soil in the forest and how they're interconnected, that it is simply impossible to make change within one of the dimensions of an organization without it having some sort of impact, either directly or indirectly, to the other dimensions of your organization. And so then it behooves us, as we're thinking about building and maintaining the healthy organizational culture, even in the midst of change, that we consider the impact that the changes that we're making to culture will have on the other dimensions of the organization. Next slide, please. And so when we're speaking specifically to culture and climate within an organization, we are talking about things that will influence behavior, including staff morale and well-being, your staff cohesion, shared beliefs and values, your cultural competencies, attitudes, trust, communication, autonomy of staff, a sense of safety, compensation, yes, but it is not the largest driver, rewards and recognition and accountability. These are components of culture and climate within an organization. And now we'll move on to speaking to a few factors that drive organizational culture. Next slide, please. Again, borrowing rather from our friends at the Stanford Social Innovation Review, culture involves the articulation and consistent long-term promotion of the values, norms, and daily behaviors that allow people, organizations, and communities to align their actions in a disciplined way that contributes to progress. Remember, you may have the way we do things around here. You may also have the way we say we do things around here. And when those two are not aligned is when we experience unhealthy organizational culture that then becomes a deterrent to our progress because it impacts all of those characteristics that we just listed under culture. Staff morale, a sense of belonging, a sense of trust, the ability to operate in a sense of autonomy in your work. So now we know we want to have a healthy culture. Obviously, you've joined the webinar today because you want to have a healthy culture or you already have a healthy culture and you're protective of it and you want to learn more about how to maintain your culture's health even in the midst of change. So on the next slide, we'll look at some drivers of organizational culture, and then we'll dig into each one of these drivers ever so briefly to discuss some strategies that could help you develop these drivers within your organization. So beginning with purpose and mission, then we'll go into shared vision, values and beliefs, leadership and teams, how employees feel, which oftentimes is how people define culture, simply the level of employee engagement or employee satisfaction. But you see here that it's simply one of 7 drivers of culture. Communication, expectations about how things are done, and how the organization functions. So let's dig in. Next slide, please. And we do invite you to, if you have questions as we're moving along, please drop those into the chat and we will make sure that we circle back to them at the end of today's presentation. We do only have an hour together, so we are going to move rather quickly, but trust that you will ask any questions. And if you need us to slow down or revisit any part of the presentation, please, again, just drop that into the chat and we will accommodate. So our first strategy for creating and maintaining the healthy organizational culture We're starting with our first driver of purpose and mission. Your purpose is your why. If you have not already, I would highly suggest and recommend that you look up the TED Talk from Simon Sinek titled Start with Why. It's a TEDx. You can find it anywhere on YouTube or the internet. And it encapsulates the importance of understanding your why, understanding the purpose of your organization, um, the purpose of your project, the purpose of your department within your organization, and everyone within the organization having alignment and clear understanding on what that is. Then we move into your vision and impact. Where are we going? What is the vision for our organization? What will be different in our community when our work is done? If we are successful in our initiatives and our endeavors, whose lives will be impacted and what will the impact to their lives be? How we do it is influenced by our values and our philosophy. So, in what way are we engaging with community? In what way are we engaging and partnering with the families and individuals that we're serving within our organization? And what we do, of course, is our mission and our strategy. So hopefully, everyone within your organization has access, ready access to, at the very least, your mission statement and your value statement. And that's been clearly articulated to your organization and revisited as often as need be as factors within your community or within your organization change. We revisit our mission, our values, and our vision statements. But our purpose, our why, at least in community action, remains the same. Next slide, please. And so the way we articulate our values and our vision for our organization impacts the way we work within an organization. So this business model that we call the grants management business model may look familiar to you all. You have a contract with the Office of Head Start to deliver Head Start or early Head Start programming. Your services that you provide to children and families are dictated by that contract. Report your outcomes back to the Office of Head Start, and then repeat. The same for community services, housing, weatherization. You might also add LIHEAP, food banks, any other programs that you may have within your community action agency typically follow this approach to management. It's where the management is dictated, how we manage the program or service is dictated by the grant and the funding source. But you'll notice that these graphics are in columns, pretty siloed when we operate our business this way. Next slide, please. And when we're in a siloed approach like that, it can be difficult for staff and service providers within your organization, sometimes even middle management, to understand their role and how what they do every day contributes to the overall mission of the organization, the impact that they're making on a broader scale within their community. And that drives staff morale and contributes to a healthy culture when people are aligned and they understand the impact of the work that they're doing. So we offer as an alternative the community action impact model of doing business. And you'll notice here that the agency vision and purpose is overlying, it's over top of everything else. It is the umbrella under which everything else flourishes. And so we are attuned to our agency vision and purpose, and all of the work that we do is to that end. So from our vision and purpose, we develop our strategic priorities. This is your strategic plan. And from our strategic plan, with the intent to impact families, impact communities and systems, and to impact our own agency, we start thinking about in what ways do we want to impact families, our community, our agency? What outcomes do we want to see? What difference do we want to make? And then we look at strategy. What strategies might help us to achieve those outcomes? And then those strategies are further developed into programs. which are funded by our funding sources. So it's essentially turning the former grants management model on its head. But why we feel like it's important to point this out is that it puts at the center, the very starting point for your organization, both its culture and in its practice, its vision and purpose. And everything else is driven by that. So again, we start with our why. But that's just one driver of culture within an organization. We'll move on to the next slide and speak about shared vision, values, and beliefs. So now we're aligned on our mission. We are aligned on our purpose. We all understand why we're in the business that we're in. And then we get aligned on our values, vision, and belief. One way to do this is to be really intentional about strengthening the alignment between your vision and your values and in your organization. How often are we revisiting our vision statement and our value statements with our staff and our organization? Can we draw a line between our values and our practices? So, if you were to do an inventory of practices and policies within your organization, could you draw a line from them to your values? Because otherwise, values then are just aspirational. Are we operationalizing our values? Are they clear and apparent in our work? Again, it's the difference between the way things done around or the way things are done around here and the way we say we do things around here. We strongly urge you to consult the Community Action Code of Ethics to help inform your values within your organization. Of course, you'll personalize them for your organization, your community, and its culture. But the Community Action Code of Ethics is an excellent place to start. We also, in order to share vision, values, and beliefs, we have to promote inclusivity and belonging by embracing diversity. Tamerdis shared with us the iceberg graphic that showed that a small fraction of culture is above the waterline. That's true for organizations and for individuals. And so we go into conversations around cultural commitments within an organization, within a healthy organizational culture. We go into conversations about cultural commitments, not with imposing some predetermined values and beliefs onto the entire organization and its staff, but coming together to co create our cultural commitments, coming together to everyone buy in and contribute to the development of our organizational culture. And thereby, we can hold one another accountable to maintaining our organizational culture because we've all contributed to its creation. Next slide, please. And I did say we were going to have to go pretty fast, so I apologize for the speed. But any one of these cultural drivers or drivers of organizational culture that you'd like to see NCAP dig into a little deeper in a future webinar, we'd love that feedback and we'd be happy to do it. So I've heard it said that everything rises and falls on leadership. And while that may be true, leadership in and of itself cannot set and maintain organizational culture. However, leadership is a large factor in the development of healthy or unhealthy culture, and by not only by what they say and by what they do, but by what we allow as leaders to take place within our organization. What's also important when we're thinking about leadership in teams in the context of creating and maintaining organizational culture is that leadership is not a title. There are leaders within your organization that do not have manager, director, senior, anything in their position title. These are people who have influence within your organization, and they operate as leaders even without the title. And so they contribute then to creating and maintaining a healthy organizational culture. Again, authority is earned, not bestowed. And for a leader in a healthy organization, focuses on developing others, not just yourselves. It has been said that a good leader, when his work is done, the people will say, look what our leader has done for us. But when a great leader's work is done, the people will say, look what we have done for ourselves. And so we focus on developing others, not just ourselves as leaders. Within an organization, there are often teams. And you can experience, because there are teams or departments or work groups within an organization, you can experience microculture within your team that does not match to the macro culture of the overall organization. Again, that's an unhealthy culture overall because there are pockets of health within there, but they're not aligned across the organization. So teams should be grounded in their values, interests, and assets, and teams are built through relationships. Um, Again, we're enabling others to achieve a shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. That is leadership. And so, once again, I want to reiterate that leadership does help drive organizational culture, both by what we say and what we do in the position of leaders and in the position of influencers who may not have a leadership position, but also in what we allow to happen within an organization. Next slide, please. And so we can counteract some um, factors that are sometimes detrimental to organizational culture as leaders and influencers within our organization. So, if the inhibitor to your healthy organizational culture is inertia, we're no sense of urgency. We're kind of stuck. We're buffering, if you will. Leadership can create a sense of urgency. Well, we won't manufacture urgency, but remind people of the importance of the work that we're doing, the importance of the mission of community action, the impact that we're seeking to make, not just simply placing arbitrary deadlines on things to create a sense of urgency, but a shared understanding and embracing of the value that this work is important. This work is critical to our community, and we don't have time to spare because there are people in our community who are waiting for us to show up in the way that we do to impact our community. We counter apathy with anger, not at staff, not at one another, but at the problem. We get angry about the conditions that perpetuate poverty in our community. And that anger, it's almost righteous indignation. We become indignant um, with living with the conditions of poverty that are perpetuated in our community. We counteract fear with hope. And sometimes we take hope in micro doses. We find hope where we can get it. Sometimes we embrace hope audaciously, but it is the counter to fear. We counter isolation with solidarity. This work can feel isolating. Having worked 8 years myself in a local community action agency, I know all too well how you can sometimes feel alone in the work. And so we create within a healthy culture opportunities for solidarity to show that we're all in this work together. If teams or individuals within your organization are experiencing self doubt, we counter that with you can make a difference. Um, I came into work in the Community Action Network with the mission to change the world, and we have in small bites. And so, even baby steps are a step forward. So, when we're experiencing self doubt that would compromise our organizational culture, let's remember and remind one another that we can and are making a difference in our community. Next slide, please. So, another driver of organizational culture is how the employees feel. I've heard it said that your organizational culture or your employee satisfaction isn't determined in their staff surveys or their staff engagement or staff satisfaction responses. Your culture and your staff morale is determined by how your employees feel on Sunday night. How does your staff feel when they think about getting ready to go back to work the next day? How do they feel at the end of a holiday or a vacation? Are they looking forward to getting back to the work? Are they eager to get in and get caught up on what they may have missed, to see what impact has been made, whose lives have been changed? Compensation does drive, in part, how employees feel. I doubt anyone on this call today would say, no, I'm not at all concerned by how much money I bring home. We all are because we have needs outside of our job that must be met. But recent research has shown that it is no longer the leading driver of employee satisfaction. Employees more often now are looking for a sense of meaning in their work. They want the work they do to matter. And if we can draw a line between the work that every person on our staff is doing to our mission statement, to our vision statement, how are you contributing from your intake receptionist to your mechanics in your Head Start Auto Depot? How is each person in your organization contributing to the success of your organization and the impact it's making within the community? Employees also want to have a sense of autonomy and shared power. Gone are the days of checklists, checking boxes, micromanaging folks. People want to know that they are entrusted to make decisions within their purview, and that they have the power to be innovative in their work. They want to have um, opportunities to contribute to decision making where that's okay, where where it's allowable, where there's room for that. Now, there's some regulations and compliances that we have in community action that do not lend themselves to shared decision making or shared power. Okay, so we're not talking about those. But in the areas where we do have flexibility as an organization, we ought to actively seek out and intentionally seek out employee input and feedback. Fun and joy, the work of community action is serious, um, important, critical, even work that we are doing in communities. And it can be taxing and it can certainly take a toll on the folks who are doing the work every day. And so we, in a healthy organizational culture, will look for and intentionally build in ways to have fun and infuse and inject joy into our work where we can. We're open to feedback. Do we have a regular, consistent mechanism by which staff can offer feedback um, without fear of retribution? Are we rewarding good behavior? Again, leadership helps to drive culture by what we do and say, but also by what we allow. So, are we rewarding folks who go above and beyond? Are we recognizing not just accomplishments, but effort? And are we providing opportunities for our staff to develop themselves within their role and within their community? Are we developing talent? Nobody grows their own better than community action. So, are we continuing this legacy of helping folks within our team to um, build out their toolbox, to sharpen their axes, to build their muscles, use whatever metaphor you'd like, but are we developing our talent and giving folks an opportunity to learn more outside of their day-to-day work? Next slide, please. And there's data to support this. We won't go too deep into this, but some research from our friends at McKinsey and Company around their organizational health index shows that within a healthy organization, 94% of staff would recommend someone else join their organization. They'd recommend someone else to apply to their organization. In unhealthy organizations, that's only 63%. In a healthy organization, 87% of staff had said that they plan to continue being employed at their current nonprofit 1 year from now. And I know that within the network, turnover has become an issue for many organizations in the last few years. And one way that we can stem the tide of turnover within the nonprofit, particularly in the human services sector, is by developing our organizational culture. In this regard, it may seem like culture building, team building, community building within your organization is a nice to have, a nice to do, but it's not critical. It's not mission critical. But when you think about the time and the money that you invest, uh, every time you have to recruit a new staff person, and the time and the money and the context that you lose every time you lose a staff person, it becomes very clear very quickly that building and maintaining your organizational culture produces a return on investment in such that we cannot afford to ignore it. Next slide, please. So another driver of organizational culture is communication. We cannot emphasize this one enough. that consistent and transparent communication fosters psychological safety and mutual trust. It's been said that in the absence of information, the imagination flourishes. And all too often, when people are left with a void of information, a void of fact, their minds default to the worst case scenario. And so, if meetings are happening behind closed doors and folks aren't really sure about what that meeting is about, they start to wonder, why is leadership locked up in the conference room all day? Leadership may just be planning a staff retreat, but can we communicate that to the staff so that they're not left to wonder, um, and perhaps wander down a path of negativity? One example that we've heard from agencies in the network that have gotten a great response is biweekly video updates from the executive director, or in larger departments from the program director. Um, Speaking to topics of concern from the staff, addressing anything that's coming up on the calendar, any applications that are current for grants and funding that are currently under development, any outreach or PR initiatives that we're undertaking is shared broadly across the organization. And thankfully, in today's world of technology, you can just as easily record this message on your phone and send it out through email to all of your staff, or if you have a group text chain among your staff. It does not have to be polished and professional. Your people just want to know what's happening, what's going on, and that helps to foster, again, psychological safety and mutual trust that is absolutely critical to a healthy organizational culture. There has to be mechanisms for two-way communication. So we go back to the feedback loop that is important for employee satisfaction. Is there a mechanism by which staff who are not in leadership have an opportunity to share their concerns, their thoughts, their feedback, their recommendations for being more efficient or doing things differently? And again, when we're communicating, we're celebrating effort, not just the wins. Of course, we celebrate the wins. We aren't always the best at doing that in community action. So it's important that we take time to celebrate the wins, but also to celebrate the effort, because did we learn something? So we may have piloted a project, we may have had an event that didn't have the turnout that we were hoping that we'd have. We don't count it a loss, we unpack it, we determine what went right, what could we have done differently, and then we celebrate the people who planned and executed that initiative for the effort that they put into the work. Next slide, please. Now we're getting to expectations about how things are done. Um, Within a healthy organization, there is accountability up, down, and across. Leadership is accountable to the people that they serve, because leaders are servants. And of course, staff is accountable to leadership, and staff is accountable to one another. And so when we're building this culture together, remember that we endorse accountability up, down, and across. This is how we foster, again, psychological safety and how we build trust. This is how we build alignment between how we say we do things around here and how we actually do things around here. Um, Accountability allows us to increase a sense of staff autonomy. So, yes, there is some liberty in the non essential functions of your work. However, you are still held accountable to the deliverables and the outcomes that we are committed to as an organization. We are still holding ourselves and one another accountable to the mission that we set out to do. Another way we endorse accountability is through regular and routine performance appraisals. Now, of course, we have our annual review or employee evaluations, but there's opportunity for every time we interact with staff to provide some performance appraisals or feedback. We need a healthy organizational infrastructure. This includes our finance, our IT, our HR, and our procurement departments and functions. It is frustrating to be up against a deadline or to have very critical work to do or reports that need to be submitted and then have to fight against ineffective, inefficient processes and policies to not have the infrastructure that we need. So let's take a look at our policies and procedures. Are there some that are now antiquated because of the rise of technology within our organization? Are there some that were established to counter a problem that is no longer a presence in our organization? So there's steps in our processes that we can remove. Um, are they efficient, effective, and are they compassionate? Do they consider the fact that policies and processes are carried out by people, human beings? And do we account for that in their development? In a healthy organization, we do. Next slide, please. And finally, of our drivers of organizational culture is how the organization functions. And hopefully you've been able to take the six previous drivers and look at them in the perspective of we're not just looking at the technical aspects of how our organization functions, like, how do we process applications? How do we submit reports? How do we requisition purchases? There are the technical aspects, of course, that contribute to how our organization functions and overall contribute to the organizational culture. But organizational culture, again, is influenced just as much by the people aspect, the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of our staff and our leadership, their attitudes and their motivations. We can draft out and build out policies and processes that we think will help us to define a healthy organizational culture. But if the people who are within the organization are not invested and aligned with um, those policies and practices, if they are not motivated in the work that they're doing, then the organizational culture will suffer overall. Again, as we said earlier, that organizational culture is not a set it and forget it. It evolves as the people on your staff evolve, as the conditions that impact your work in your organization and in your community evolve. And change is inevitable. Change is going to come. And how do we shore up our organizational culture to withstand change or to be an asset to us as we navigate through change? So now I'm going to hand back to Tamerdis, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about the influence of organizational culture on change management. Tamerdis?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, as we continue to speak about a healthy organizational culture, we know that change is inevitable, right? The culture shifts, the people change, the needs of our agency change. So change can be positive, it can be negative, or it can be neutral. Change can be disruptive. Um, as our famous Jeannie Chaffin says, there can be a time of cussing and discussing, but we end up getting to the needed result. Change can create opportunity and spur innovation. Change is necessary, right? Because a healthy organization is continuous work. Change can also have positive and it can also have negative outcomes. But again, it gives us all the pillars that we need to ensure that maintaining our organizational culture is at a head. Next slide. So when we think about that change that happens, one thing that we have to be focused on is understanding the response that our staffs that are human can have to that change. So when we look at the model here, it's a circle and it represents the true nature of each change that we can experience. So in the outside ring are six predictable stages of change. They're one through six. The name of the stages are loss, doubt, discomfort, discovery, understanding, and integration. So the inside pie pieces, they list the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors most associated with this stage. And we don't have a lot of time to dive into each one of them, but just knowing that human response to change happens on both a psychological and physiological level. So with loss and doubt, we see that both of these are in the red zone because there's feelings of fear and cautiousness, feelings of resentment, being skeptical and sometimes resistant, right? That's the first and second change. But as we get to the third and fourth change, the discomfort feeling, the discovery, we see the feelings of anxiety, confusion, behavior at times can be unproductive. But there's a danger zone that I want to point out between stage 3 and 4. Because in between that discomfort and discovery zone, one or two things can happen here. We can either stay in the discomfort zone and end up being back in stage 1 or 2, or we can open our minds to a new way of thinking, to a different mindset than we had before, the accepting of it. And so we get to that stage of discovery. And then we have the feelings of anticipation, anticipating what's going to come next. The thoughts that we have now are more positive. Our behavior is energized. And again, if we can get past that danger zone, we are on to stage 5 and 6, which are the understanding of what's going on, and finally into the integration of the change. Within 5 and 6, we see feelings of confidence, satisfaction. Our behavior is productive, our behavior is generous. So, again, even with all the changes here, if we can anticipate the human response to change, we can be prepared for it, and just being mindful to not become complacent or stagnant in the levels of discomfort. Next slide. So, when we think about those human changes that we just saw in that cycle of change, here are some of the common culture clashes that we commonly see in community action. Agency restructure. So we know that this goes beyond sharing just the values, the purpose, the mission. It can create a difficult climate if staff have not been involved from the very beginning. The changes in a service delivery model, implementing a whole family approach, moving to a centralized intake process, implementing a new team communication method, adopting family centered coaching, and even new leadership. Again, all common culture clashes that we see. Next slide. And so here we've listed several change management frameworks, and these allow us the tools and resources to be able to help us with that human change, right? Help us to continue on even through the difficulties and the challenges. And a couple of these change management frameworks are Cotter's change management theory, Lewin's change management theory, McKinsey's change management model, William Bridges transition model. And despite the many approaches that you will see that these have, there are several commonalities amongst these frameworks when it comes to measuring change. For example, Cotter's comes with 8 different steps that are used. So it really focuses on both the human side of the work, but also the technical side of the work. Some of the other frameworks have a system, Lewin's, for example, which is unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. So, again, that's going back to the really honing in on the differences in the change cycle. And again, being as prepared as possible for the challenges that may come with the change. Next slide, as we'll look at a couple of more. The change management toolkit here. So here, this is by Berkeley College. It's the Change Management Toolkit, and it really is a baseline for change readiness assessment. We'll be sure to include the link to this in the follow-up. Again, it's just another resources. All of the resources have added pieces of value, and you will really have to go in and see which one of those works best for you. I feel like they will all give you the outcome that you are looking for, but some of them may work better with your approach or your specific focus. Next slide. So now we'll give you a chance to put questions in the chat, or feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. Uh, but I'll keep going because we just have just a few more that we want to get into. Next slide. All right. So when we are talking about, right, those drivers that Jennifer mentioned earlier today, the shared vision, the purpose, the leadership, communication, the functions, how are we able to measure that? Right? Because we want to measure the process that we are using to reach our organizational health. Next slide. So, here at the partnership, we do have an organizational assessment. And with this organizational assessment, it's not just a individualistic view, right? But an aggregate data for where your organization is. So this is what it will look like here. We'll be sure to include this link as well. And I want to show you a couple more slides. Go to the next slide. This is what you will see. And again, you'll use this tool to assess and measure where your organization is. And so you'll see a link right there for a tab where you can click, and also uh, a tab there for you to be able to view what those results are. Next slide. And with these results, you can really gauge where your organization is, where it needs to go. And, sometimes we think that our organization is in a certain place, and it's not until we get the results back when we realize, maybe our organization is not really where we thought it was, and maybe we should go to the thinking table to see what changes need to take place. Next slide. Another resource that we are happy to offer to the network is a new learning series that we have on Community Action Academy, and it is applying the human services value curve to advance SIM, or social and economic mobility. It's a tool that we hope that community action leaders will utilize to transform programs and services. We hope that by applying this framework, agencies can begin to move beyond the normal regulatory requirements and toward a more generative business model that maximizes capacity and enhances outcomes for our families. Next slide. And here is our information here. We definitely want you to stay in touch. Please let us know if there are any questions. I can't see the chat right now to see if they are any questions. And I don't see any other than, yes, the slideshow and slides and also links will be sent out to everyone. Feel free to, you see the email address there. If there was any aspect today of this presentation that you would like more information on, please feel free to reach out to the team, because we would be more than happy to assist you if you feel like you are experiencing any barriers or challenges when it comes to organizational health, change, or management. Please again feel free to reach out to us. So, again, we thank you for joining us today for our webinar Wednesday. And also, again, feel free to just stay in touch. Thank you so much. Bye bye.